In our last installment, Gilly had some adventures with some robbers, and he discovered what happened to the crystal egg, and that the crystal egg was hatched, and out of it came a swan, and it is the Swan of Endless Tales who chants and sings songs. So we'll see what happens to Gilly next. The Town of the Red Castle. The Town of the Red Castle. Flann was the name that the old woman of beer gave to Gilly of the goatskin when he came back to tell her that the Swan of Endless Tales had been hatched out of the crystal egg. He went from her house then and came to where the King of Ireland's son waited for him. The two comrades went along a well-traveled road. As they went on, they fell in with the men driving herds of ponies, men carrying packs on their backs, men with tools for working gold and silver, bronze and iron. Every man whom they asked said, "We are going to the town of the Red Castle, and to the great fair that will be held there." The king's son and Flann thought they should go to the town of the Red Castle too, for where so many people would be, there was a chance of hearing what went before and what came after the unique tale. So on they went. And when they had come to a well that was under a great rock, those whom they were with halted. They said it was the custom for the merchants and sellers to wait there for a day, and go into the town of the Red Castle the day following. On this day, they said, the people of the town celebrate the festival of midsummer, and they do not like a great company of people to go into their town until the festival is over. The King of Ireland's son and Flann went on, and they were let into the town. The people had lighted great fires in their marketplace, and they were driving their cattle through the fires. "If there be evil on you, may it burn," they were crying. They were afraid that witches and enchanters might come into the town with the merchants and the sellers, and that was the reason they did not permit a great company to enter. The fires in all their houses had been quenched that day, and they might not be lighted except from the fires the cattle had gone through. The fires were left blazing high, and the king's son and Flann spent hours watching them, and watching the crowds that were around. Then the time came to take fire to the houses. They who came for fire were all young maidens. Each came to the light of one of the great fires, took coals from a fire that had burned low, placed them in a new earthen vessel, and went away. Flann thought that all the maidens were beautiful and wonderful, although the king's son told him that some were crop-headed and some were hunchback. Then a maiden came who was so high above the rest that Flann had no words to speak of her. She had silver on her head and silver on her arms, and the people around the fires all bowed to her. She had black, black hair, and she had a smiling face, not happily smiling, but proudly smiling. Flann thought that a star had bent down with her. And when she had taken the fire and had gone away, Flann said, "She is surely the king's daughter." "She is," said the King of Ireland's son. "The people have spoken her name." "What is her name?" asked Flann. "It is Lassarina," said the king's son. "Flame of wine." "Shall we see her again?" said Flann. "That I do not know," said the king's son. "Come now, and let us speak to let us ask the people here if they have knowledge of the unique tale." "Wait," said Flann. "They are talking about Princess Flame of Wine." He did not move, but listened to what was said. All said that the king's daughter was proud. Some said she was beautiful, but others answered that her lips were thin and her eyes were mocking. No other maidens came for fire. Flann stood before the one that still blazed and thought and thought. The king's son asked many if they had knowledge of the unique tale, but no one had heard of it. Some told him that there would be merchants and sellers from many parts of the world at the fair that would be held on the morrow, and that there would be a chance of meeting one who had knowledge of it. Then the king's son went with one who brought him to a brewfer's, that is, to a house of hospitality, or an inn, maintained by the king for strangers. As for Flann, he sat looking into the fire until it died down, and then he slept before it. Flann was wakened by a gander and his flock of geese that stood round him, shook their wings, and set up their goose gabble. It was day then, although there was still a star in the sky. He threw furze roots where there was a glow, and made a fire blaze up again. Then the dogs of the town came down to look at him, and then stole away. Horns were blown outside, and the watchman opened the gates. Flann shook himself and stood up to see the folk that were coming in. First came the men who drove the mountain ponies that had lately fed with the deer in wild places. Then came men in leathern jerkins who led wide-horned bulls, a black bull and a white bull, and a white bull and a black bull, one after the other. Then there were the men who brought in high, swift hounds, 3 to each leash they held. Women in brown cloaks carried cages of birds. Men carried on their shoulders and in their belts tools for working gold and silver, bronze and iron, and there were calves and sheep, and great horses and weighty chariots, and colored cloths and things closed in packs that merchants carried on their shoulders. The famous bards and storytellers and harpists would not come until noontime, when the business of the fair would have abated. But with the crowd of beggars came ballad singers, and the tellers of the stories that were called Go by the Market Stake, because they were told around the stake in the marketplace, and were very common. And at the tail of the comers whom did Flann see but Moog, the captain of the robbers? Moog wore a hareskin cap. His left eye protruded as usual, and he walked limpingly. He had a pack on his back, and he led a small, swift-looking horse of a reddish color. Flann called to him as he passed, and Moog gave a great start. He grinned when he saw it was Flann, and walked up to him. "Moog," said Flann, "what are you doing in the town of the Red Castle?" "I am here to sell a few things," said Moog. "This little horse," said he, "and a few things I have in my pack." "And where are your friends?" asked Flann. "My band, do you mean?" said Moog. "Surely they all left me when you proved you were the better robber. What are you doing here?" "I have no business at all," said Flann. "By the hazel, that's what I like to hear you say. Join me then. You and me would do well together." "I won't join you," said Flann. "I'd rather have you with me than the whole of the band. What were they anyway? Cabbage heads." Moog winked with his protruding eye. "Wait till you see me again," said he. "I've the grandest things in my pack." He went on leading the little horse. Then Flann set out to look for the king's son. He found him at the door of the Brufers, and they drank bowls of milk and ate oaten bread together, and then they went to the gate of the town to watch the notable people who were coming in. And with the bards and harpers and king's envoys who came in, the king's son saw his 2 half-brothers, Dermot and Donal. He hailed them, and they knew him and came up to him gladly. The king's son made Flann known to them, saying that he too was the son of a king. They looked fine youths, Donal and Dermot, in their red cloaks, with their heads held high, and a brag in their walk and in their words. They left their horses with the grooms, and they walked with Flann and the king's son. They were tall and ruddy. The king's son was more brown in the hair and more hawk-like in the face. The 3 were different from the dark-haired, dark-eyed, red-lipped lad, whom the old woman of Beer had given the name of Flann. No one had seen the king who lived in the Red Castle, Dermot and Donal told the other 2. He was called the Wry-Faced King, and on account of his disfigurement he let no one but his counselors see him. "We are to go to his castle today," said Dermot and Donal. "You come too, brother," said he to the king's son. "And you too, comrade," said Donal to Flann. "Why should we not all go? By Ogma, are we not all sons of kings?" Flann wondered if he would see the king's daughter, Flame of Wine. He would surely go to the castle. They drank ale, played chess, and talked until it was afternoon. Then the grooms who were with Donal and Dermot brought the 4 youths new red cloaks. They put them on and went towards the king's castle. "Brother," said Dermot to the king's son, I want to tell you that we are not going back to our father's castle, nor to his kingdom. We have taken the world for our pillow. We are going to leave the grooms asleep one fine morning, and go as the salmon goes down to the river. Why do you want to leave our father's kingdom? Because we don't want to rule, nor to learn to rule. We'll let you, brother, do all that. We're going to learn the trade of a swordsmith. We would make fine swords. And with the king of Senlabor, there is a famous swordsmith, and we're going to learn the trade from him. The four went to the Red Castle, and they were brought in, and they went and sat on the benches to wait for the king's steward, who would receive them. And while they waited, they watched the play of a pet fox in the courtyard. Flann was wondering all the time if the Princess Flame of Wine would pass through the courtyard, or come into the hall where they waited. Then he saw her come up to the courtyard. She saw the youths in the hall, and she turned round to watch the pet fox for a while. Then she came into the chamber and stood near the door. She wore a mask across her face, but her brow and mouth and chin were shown. The youths saluted her, and she bent her head to them. One of the women who had brought birds to the fair followed her, bringing a cage. Flame of Wine talked to this woman in a strange language. Although she talked to the woman, Flann saw that she watched his three companions. Him she did not notice because of the bench on which he sat was behind the others. Flame of Wine looked at the king's son first, then turned her eyes from him. She bent her head to listen to what Donal and Dermot were saying. Flann she did not look at all, and he became sick at heart of the Red Castle. The king's steward came into the hall, and when he announced who the youths were, 3 of the sons of Ireland traveling with their foster brother, Flame of Wine went over and spoke to them. "May we see you tomorrow, king's sons," said she. "Tomorrow is our feast of the gathering of the apples. It might be pleasant for you to hear music in the king's garden." She smiled on Donal and Dermot and on the king's son and went out of the chamber. The king's steward feasted the 4 youths and afterwards made them presents, but Flann did not heed what he ate, nor what he heard said, nor what present was given him.